Unaware his poor wife had just inherited $50 billion, Grant Carter dragged Grace, still in her thin house clothes, onto the high-rise balcony during a raging blizzard, slammed the glass door shut, and locked her outside. But his smiling lover, Liana, stayed warm inside, pressing her manicured fingers to the window as she mocked Grace's shaking hands like it was a joke. Grace wasn't a troublemaker. She was the kind of woman who stretched one pot of soup for 3 days, who hid her hunger behind quiet smiles, who still believed marriage meant safety even when her own husband treated her like a burden. Grant, on the other hand, wore power like cologne. Sharp, expensive, suffocating. And tonight he wanted her to feel small enough to obey without questions. The snow outside slammed sideways against the glass, swallowing the city lights, while Grace's breath turned white and her bare feet went numb on freezing concrete. Because in Grant's world, punishment didn't need fists. It just needed cold. Inside, Liana laughed softly, leaning close to the door like a queen at a cage. "Poor Grace," she mouthed, eyes glittering, "still pretending you matter." Grant didn't look guilty. He looked relieved, like locking his wife out into a blizzard was the easiest way to silence whatever she had just discovered. Grace tried the handle again. Locked. She knocked. No answer. She looked down at the streets far below, dizzy, realizing one slip could end everything. Then her wrist vibrated, once, like a heartbeat. A hidden alert, a name she didn't recognize, and the word that didn't belong in her life, inherited. But if Grace truly inherited $50 billion, why was her husband so desperate to keep her out in the blizzard? What did Grant know that she didn't? Why was his lover mocking her like she'd already seen the ending? And what did Grace do next? That didn't just hurt him, but ruined him. Grace forced her back against the icy balcony wall, knees, trembling as another gust of blizzard wind slammed into the building and made the glass door rattle like it wanted to shatter. Her breath came out in frantic white bursts, and every inhale felt like sharp needles scraping her throat. She wrapped her arms around herself, but the thin cotton of her lounge clothes was useless. Cold crawled under her skin as if it had hands. Inside the penthouse, Grant stood inches from the glass, calm and immaculate, like he'd just placed trash outside for collection. Beside him, Liana's face glowed in the warm light, her smile bright with cruelty, as she lifted her phone and casually recorded Grace's shaking body. "You want attention?" Liana called through the glass, voice muffled but clear enough to slice. "Smile for the camera. Let the world see the poor wife you pretend to be." Grace banged the door with numb palms. "Grant, please, open it. It's a blizzard." Grant didn't move at first. He turned his head slightly, like he was listening to something in the room that mattered more than her life. Then he finally spoke, voice low, controlled, and deadly polite. "You should have thought about that before you started hiding things from me." "Hiding?" Grace's teeth chattered so hard the word broke. "I didn't hide anything." Grant lifted her phone, her own cracked Android, between two fingers like it was contaminated. The screen still glowed with the alert that had changed the air in the room. Inherited. He angled it so she could see it through the glass, and Grace's stomach dropped because she realized he'd read it. He knew, and whatever it meant, he was terrified of her touching it again. "You don't get to decide what you hide in my house," Grant said. "Our house," Grace whispered. But even as she said it, a memory hit her like a flash of heat. Her mother's hands firm on her shoulders when Grace was 16, guiding her toward a window during a snowstorm back in Detroit. Narrative exposition, not spoken dialogue. Grace had been a skinny girl then, wearing a borrowed coat, watching ice build on the glass while her mother boiled water and poured it into a bottle wrapped in cloth. Evelyn's eyes were always scanning, calculating. She'd never called it fear. She'd called it preparation. And on nights like this, she'd teach Grace strange, practical things. How cold steals your strength quietly. How panic kills faster than frost. How to use the environment as shelter. It never felt like motherly advice. It felt like training, like Evelyn expected a storm one day that wasn't made of weather. Now, on the balcony, Grace swallowed that memory like medicine. Inside, Liana leaned into Grant, whispering fast. Grant's jaw tightened, and his eyes flicked toward the kitchen counter where Grace's phone had been moments ago, toward the hallway, toward the door, as if mapping exits. That twitchy calculation didn't match a man who felt in control. It matched a man who just realized the ground under him wasn't solid. Grace's wrist vibrated again. The smartwatch. A cheap old thing Grant had mocked for years. Why do you wear that nonsense? You're not an executive. Yet it was buzzing now like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Grace lifted her arm close to her face. The tiny screen flashed a notification she could barely read through shaking tears. Unknown number. Confirm you are safe. Unusual activity detected on trust accounts since 4 p.m. Do not share. Trust accounts. Unusual activity. Do not share. Grace's mind snapped into a new shape. Sharp. Suspicious. Awake. This wasn't just inheritance news. This was an alarm. Someone was trying to move something. Someone close. Her eyes locked on Grant's hand, tight around her phone, knuckles slightly pale. On his wrist, his expensive watch caught the light. A man who loved control, loved records, access, passwords, and suddenly all those helpful moments over the years replayed differently. Narrative exposition, not spoken dialogue. When Grace had married Grant, she'd been grieving and broke, and Grant had arrived like rescue, handsome, generous, calling her strong when she felt fragile. He'd paid for dinner, insisted she move in, insisted she quit her job because a wife shouldn't stress. He'd offered to handle paperwork because she hated forms. He'd collected her IDs for safekeeping. He'd changed mailing addresses for convenience. At the time, it felt like love. Now, in the blizzard, it looked like a slow, patient cage being built around her. Grace pressed her forehead to the freezing glass, voice dropping into a plea she hated herself for. Grant, please, if there's something, tell me. I'll listen. Just let me inside. Grant stared at her, eyes flat. You'll listen, he repeated, like the phrase amused him. Then he leaned closer, so his breath fogged the inside of the glass. You'll do what you're told. Liana laughed softly. See, even now you're begging like a charity case. Grace's lips trembled, but she forced herself to look away from them because looking at them would make her emotional, and emotion was what they wanted. She scanned the balcony, body shaking violently, vision narrowing. Metal chair, storage bench, a decorative planter half filled with snow, a grill cover flapping in the wind. And then she saw it. A small storage box tucked against the wall, partially covered by drifted snow, like someone had pushed it there deliberately. Grace stumbled to it, fingers stiff and clumsy. The lid resisted. She yanked harder. It popped open. Inside was a folded emergency blanket, silver and crinkled, and a lighter sealed in plastic. Grace froze, even colder than before because she knew instantly Grant didn't keep emergency supplies. He mocked preparation. He mocked caution. But her mother did. Narrative exposition, not spoken dialogue. Evelyn Carter had always hidden just-in-case items in quiet places, under sink panels, behind books, taped inside closet shelves, like she believed danger arrived when you weren't looking. She never explained why she lived like that. Grace used to think it was trauma. Now, with the word trust pulsing on her watch, Grace wondered if it was strategy. Grace ripped the emergency blanket open and wrapped it around her torso, tucking it tight under her arms the way her mother had taught her years ago. The crinkling sound carried through the storm. Inside, Grant's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected her to adapt. He'd expected her to break. Grace crouched low behind the storage box to block the wind. Her body still shook, but her mind steadied just enough to choose. She raised her smartwatch and held the side button down until the screen flashed. Emergency call. 3, 2, 1. Inside, Liana's smile faltered. Grant. What is she doing? Grant's calm cracked. Just a hairline fracture, but Grace saw it. Fear. Because in Grant's world, cruelty was private. It was controlled. It was deniable. But the moment help got involved, cruelty became evidence. Grace spoke into the watch, voice ragged but clear. I'm locked outside on a balcony during a blizzard. My husband locked me out. I need police and medical. Inside, Grant lunged toward the door, fumbling with the lock, suddenly frantic. But Grace didn't stand up yet. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't trying to save her marriage. She was saving her life. And she could feel it, somewhere beneath the shaking. Something else waking up too. Something her mother had been trying to protect. Something worth $50 billion. And a truth Grant was about to learn the hardest way. Grace stayed crouched behind the storage box, the emergency blanket crackling with every tremor of her body, as if the cold itself was trying to peel it off her. The blizzard wind screamed around the balcony, But inside the penthouse, the world suddenly turned frantic. Grant's silhouette jerked left and right, hands moving too fast, like he was trying to erase a mistake before it became permanent. Liana grabbed his arm. "Open it! Open it!" Her voice rose, losing that playful cruelty, cracking into panic. "If she called the police, do you know what that means?" Grant yanked his arm free without even looking at her. "Shut up." His jaw was tight, eyes locked on Grace's wrist like the watch was a weapon. "She doesn't have her phone. She shouldn't be able to call anyone." Grace's lips were turning numb, but she pushed her face closer to the watch as the dispatcher's voice buzzed faintly in her ear. She answered every question between shivers. Address, floor, whether she was injured, whether she felt safe. The word safe felt like a joke, but she said, "No." And that single syllable seemed to change the weight of everything. Inside, Grant reached for Grace's phone on the counter like he was about to smash it. He stopped mid-motion when it lit up with another incoming call. Attorney Daniel Hargrove. The name flashed bright. Grant's eyes widened, and for a split second, Grace saw it clearly. The reason he locked her out wasn't only cruelty, it was containment, isolation, a desperate attempt to keep her from hearing what that call would say. Lena leaned in, reading the screen, and her face drained of color. That's real," she whispered. "Grant, that's a real firm name. I've seen it." Grant hissed through his teeth, voice low. "Of course you've seen it." "You didn't tell me it was that big," Liana snapped back, fear turning into accusation. "You said she was nobody. You said she was poor." Grace pressed her numb hand to the glass door again, eyes half-lidded, watching them argue like strangers suddenly. Remembering they weren't on the same team. Snow whipped across her lashes. Her breath came out in uneven clouds. Narrative exposition, not spoken dialogue. In that moment, Grace's mind drifted, not into helplessness, but into a sharp, unwanted clarity. She remembered Grant's romance differently. The way he'd asked about her mother too early. The way he'd insisted on meeting Evelyn once, then never wanted to visit again. The way he always intercepted mail. The way he'd joked about inheritance whenever Grace tried to save money. "What are you saving for, Grace? Your mother's secret gold." It had never been funny. It had been fishing. On the balcony, Grace's smartwatch vibrated again, confirmation that responders were on the way. The dispatcher said, "Stay on the line with me, ma'am." And Grace whispered, "I'm here," like a promise to herself. Grant picked up the phone call from Hargrove. Too fast, too desperate. "Hello?" Grant's say-what voice tried to sound smooth. "Yes, this is—" He stopped. His eyes flicked toward the balcony, toward Grace, then away again. His shoulders stiffened as if a stern voice had just cut him down. Grace couldn't hear the lawyer's words, but she could see the effect. Grant's face lost its color. His mouth opened slightly, then snapped shut. His grip tightened until his knuckles turned white. Liana stepped closer. What did he say? Grant covered the mouthpiece, whispering harshly, "Back off." Grace's chest ached with cold, but her heart beat harder. If that lawyer was speaking with authority, it meant this wasn't a scam. It meant her mother wasn't who Grace thought she was. Then the elevator dinged faintly somewhere beyond the apartment door. Voices in the hallway. A deep male voice, building security followed by sharper commands. "Police! Open the door!" Grant froze. Liana stumbled backward like the words were a gun pointed at her. Grant moved. Fast. Not to help Grace, but to control the narrative. He rushed toward the front door, forcing his face into a concerned mask, smoothing his hair with his hand like he was preparing for an audience. He opened the door with an exaggerated sigh. "Thank God you're here," he said loudly, performative. "My wife, she's emotional. She ran outside during an argument and locked herself out. I've been trying to calm her down." "Sir," an officer's voice cut in, firm and unimpressed. "Step aside. We received a 911 call from a smartwatch stating she was locked out." Grant's mask cracked again. His eyes darted. The officer continued, "Where is she?" Grant forced a laugh. "Balcony. Like I said, she—" The officer didn't let him finish. Heavy footsteps crossed the penthouse fast. Grace heard the balcony lock slide. Warm air spilled out like mercy. The door swung open, and a uniformed officer stepped through, eyes widening at the sight of Grace crouched behind the storage box, wrapped in a silver emergency blanket, skin pale, lips trembling. "Ma'am," he said gently, crouching beside her. "Can you stand?" Grace nodded, trying. Her legs wobbled violently, but she pushed up, supported by the officer's arm. As she stepped inside, the warmth hit her so suddenly she almost collapsed from the shock of it. Behind the officer, Grant stood with his hands raised slightly, as if being cooperative meant being innocent. Liana hovered near the kitchen island, clutching her purse like it could hide her. Grace's phone was placed into her hands by another officer. Her fingers barely worked, but the screen lit again immediately. Attorney Daniel Hargrove, calling. Grace answered, voice hoarse. Hello? The lawyer's voice came through, urgent and steady. Ms. Grace Carter, thank God. Are you safe? Please say yes. This line may be monitored. Grace's eyes lifted slowly to Grant. Grant's face tightened in warning. Grace swallowed the fear and said, I'm safe. The police are here. Good, Hargrove said. Then listen carefully. Your mother, Dr. Evelyn Carter, established the Carter Family Holdings Trust. Current valuation is approximately $50 billion. You are the sole beneficiary. We detected an unauthorized attempt to access and reroute portions of the trust this evening. Silence slammed into the room. Even the officers paused. Liana's mouth fell open. Grant's entire body went still, like his muscles forgot how to lie. Grace's breath caught, not from cold this time, but from the weight of reality landing on her chest. $50 billion. Unaware. Poor wife. Inherited. And Grant, her husband, had locked her outside during a blizzard the moment the truth tried to reach her. Grace's voice shook, but she forced it steady. I think I know who tried. Grant whispered, barely audible, Grace, don't. Grace looked at the officer nearest to her and said, clear as glass, he took my phone. He locked me outside, and he didn't open the door until you arrived. The officer's gaze snapped to Grant. The room felt like it tilted, like power had quietly changed hands. And Grace realized the most frightening part wasn't that she'd inherited $50 billion. It was that her mother had predicted this exact moment and planted protection in the walls because someone had expected Grace to be hunted, and the storm wasn't over yet. Grant's confidence didn't collapse all at once. It fractured in layers like ice under a heavy boot. He tried to speak, but the officer's raised hand stopped him mid-breath. Sir, the officer said, voice firm. Turn around, hands behind your back. Grant blinked, stunned. Officer, come on. This is a domestic misunderstanding. My wife she's dramatic. She's always... The cuffs clicked. That sound was small, but it detonated something inside Grace. For years, Grant's cruelty had lived in private spaces, behind doors, behind smiles, behind, I'm just trying to help you. Now it was out in the open where it couldn't be explained away. Liana's heels scraped backward on the marble. Grant, tell them something. Tell them she's lying. Grant's head snapped toward her, eyes sharp with a warning that was also blame. Quiet. Liana's lips parted, offended. Excuse me? Grace watched them, trembling, and a strange thought surfaced through the fog of adrenaline. They weren't a team. They were two predators who had only shared prey. Attorney Hargrove's voice still sounded in her ear, urgent, controlled. Ms. Carter, do not discuss details in front of anyone you do not trust. The unauthorized access attempt suggests someone had intimate personal data, ID numbers, security questions, your mother's maiden name. Grace's stomach turned as memories rewired themselves. Narrative exposition, not spoken. Dialogue. Grant had insisted on helping Grace apply for a credit card years ago. He'd taken her documents, said he'd submit them online, then return them with a kiss, like he'd done her a favor. Grant had also demanded she change her phone number because too many people disturb you. He'd offered to set up her email because you're not tech-savvy. Each time, Grace had felt grateful. Each time, Grant had collected another piece of her identity like a key. Grace lowered her voice. He has my documents. He always has. Understood, Hargrove said. We anticipated this possibility. Your mother designed multi-layer verification, but the fact someone tried means they believed they could intercept you before we briefed you. Tonight's events confirm her fear. Her mother's fear. Grace closed her eyes for a second, and grief hit hard, hot, and sudden. Evelyn Carter was gone, and Grace had never gotten to ask why her mother lived like she was, waiting for war. An EMT approached, wrapping a thick blanket around Grace's shoulders. Ma'am, we need to check you for hypothermia. Grace nodded, but her eyes never left Grant. Grant's voice softened into something almost tender. Grace, baby, please. I panicked. I saw the message and I panicked. You know I love you. Love. Grace heard the word and remembered the first time he said it. Narrative exposition, not spoken dialogue. Grant had met her at a charity gala she attended as a volunteer, serving drinks with forced smiles while rich people congratulated themselves for giving back. Grant had been different. He'd noticed her. He'd asked her name like it mattered. When Grace told him she was saving for nursing school, he'd looked impressed. He'd said, "A woman like you deserves protection." Grace, grieving her father's death and exhausted from life, had mistaken control for safety. Now she saw the pattern. Grant didn't protect her. He contained her. Liana suddenly stepped forward, voice trembling with self-preservation. "Officer, if you're arresting someone, I should go. I didn't lock her outside. I was just visiting." One officer's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, what's your relationship to him?" Liana hesitated. "I'm a friend." Grace almost laughed at the audacity, but she didn't. She simply held up her phone and looked at the officers. "She's his lover. She mocked me while I was freezing." Liana's face twisted. "You're doing this because you're jealous." Grace stared at her, calm growing in the center of her chest, like a flame that didn't need oxygen. "No, I'm doing this because I want to live." Hargrove spoke again. "Ms. Carter, I'm dispatching a security liaison and initiating a full forensic audit. Your mother's trust includes automatic legal triggers in the event of coercion or attempted fraud. Once you confirm identity in person, we can lock down access permanently." Grace's mind snagged on something. Automatic legal triggers. Her mother had prepared for this. Grace turned slowly, scanning the penthouse. She noticed details she'd ignored for years. The discreet security camera above the living room corner that Grant had told her was just a smoke detector. The smart lock keypad that stored access logs. The building's hallway cameras. The concierge desk. The digital trails. Evidence was everywhere. And that was when Grace realized what would ruin Grant wasn't just arrest, it would be exposure. Grant, still cuffed, leaned toward her as if proximity could intimidate. "Grace," he hissed under his breath, "don't do anything stupid. You don't know what you're stepping into." Grace met his eyes and saw something that chilled her more than the blizzard had. Not remorse. Calculation, narrative exposition, not spoken dialogue. Evelyn Carter had once warned Grace in a quiet moment. No drama, no explanation. If someone ever shows you who they are when they believe you're powerless, remember it. That is their truth. Grace had nodded back then, not understanding. Now she understood perfectly. Grace took a slow breath. "You're right," she said softly to Grant. "I don't know what I'm stepping into." Then she looked at the officers, at the EMT, at the phone in her hand, and her voice steadied into something new. "But I'm not stepping into it alone." She lifted the phone again. "Attorney Hargrove, I want everything preserved. Every login attempt, every timestamp, every camera feed. I want it all." "Already in motion," Hargrove replied. "And Ms. Carter, I need to tell you something your mother insisted I say first, before any money discussion." Grace swallowed. "What?" Hargrove paused, just long enough to hook dread into her ribs. "Your mother didn't hide the $50 billion because she was ashamed," he said. "She hid it because she knew the moment you married the wrong man, he would try to take it." Grace's throat tightened. Tears blurred her vision. Grant's face flickered. Anger, fear, then a forced smirk. "Your mother poisoned you against me." Grace shook her head slowly, almost pitying. "No, you proved her right." Outside, the blizzard still raged, but inside the penthouse, something had shifted permanently. The poor wife, who used to apologize for breathing, had just become the owner of a truth that could crush them both. And Grace felt it, like a second storm forming behind her grief. Because if her mother planned for Grant, who else was coming? Grace didn't sleep that night, not because of the cold still trapped in her bones, but because every time she closed her eyes, she saw Grant's face behind the glass, calm as he watched her freeze. The hospital warmed her with IV fluids, wrapped her in blankets, monitored her oxygen, but none of it reached the part of her that felt newly exposed. At dawn, Chicago's sky turned a dull, bruised gray, and the blizzard quieted into heavy drifts, like the storm was pretending it never tried to kill her. Attorney Daniel Hargrove met her in a private hospital conference room, with 2 security professionals posted outside the door. He didn't waste words. His calm carried urgency the way a surgeon carries a scalpel. "Ms. Carter," he said, sliding a folder toward her, "before we discuss numbers, we discuss safety. Your mother built this trust like a fortress because she anticipated tonight." Grace's fingers tightened on the folder. Why would she think my husband would do that? Hargrove didn't flinch. Because she investigated him. The sentence hit like betrayal, then rearranged into something else. Love. A fierce, hidden love that had been working in the dark for years. Narrative exposition, not spoken dialogue. Grace remembered her mother's last visit, how Evelyn had scanned the penthouse quietly, eyes lingering on the camera-like smoke detector, the smart lock keypad, the mail tray. Grace had thought her mother looked uncomfortable. Now she realized Evelyn had been reading the room like a crime scene. Evelyn had hugged Grace a little too long at the door, and Grace had felt her mother's hand press something into the inside seam of her coat. Small, hard. Then Evelyn's voice. "Don't remove it. One day you'll understand." Grace had thrown the coat into her closet and forgotten. Until now. Grace rose abruptly and left the room, heart pounding, returning minutes later with the coat folded in her arms like it was sacred. She found the seam, tore it gently, and pulled out a tiny metal key and a laminated card with a code. Hargrove's gaze sharpened. "That's it." "What is it?" Grace whispered. "A secondary verification key," he said. "Your mother ensured no spouse could bypass the final lock without it." Grace stared at the key, tears filling her eyes. Her mother had been gone less than 24 hours and was still saving her. Hargrove continued. "We detected attempts to change your beneficiary contact information and initiate an expedited transfer process. Those attempts were blocked, but the logs show the access originated from within your household network." Grace's stomach turned. "Grant." Hargrove nodded once. "And likely assisted." Grace saw Liana's lipstick smile again, heard her mocking voice through glass, and a cold anger settled into her chest, quiet and lethal. "What do I do?" Grace asked. Hargrove leaned forward. "What you do next must ruin him legally, financially, and socially, without giving him a single opening to rewrite the story." Grace didn't scream. She didn't vow revenge. She simply listened because Evelyn had taught her. Panic is noise. Precision is power. By noon, Hargrove arranged a controlled meeting at his firm. Police report in injured hand, body cam footage requested, building surveillance preserved. Grace signed a protective order petition and authorized the forensic audit. The trust froze every channel and flagged any entity connected to Grant's name, devices, or IP history. Then came the call that truly cracked Grant's world, not from Grace, from his employer, because Carter Family Holdings wasn't just money, it was influence braided quietly through boards and holdings. A compliance officer contacted Grant's firm after receiving the police incident report, an audit notice. In corporate language, it was simple. Your employee is tied to an attempted trust interception and domestic endangerment. You will cooperate or be implicated. Grant's career didn't fall with one loud explosion. It collapsed like a building whose supports had already been cut. That evening, Grace walked into a boardroom with Hargrove and a security liaison at her side, her posture steady even while her heart ached. She wasn't dressed flashy, just clean, composed, because she didn't need costume wealth. She had something louder, evidence. A screen displayed timestamps. 4:03 p.m., trust account contact change attempt. 4:11 p.m., verification reset request. 4:17 p.m., blocked. 4:22 p.m., second attempt. 4:29 p.m., Grace's emergency call initiated. 4:36 p.m., police dispatched. Each line was a nail. Hargrove's voice was calm. Ms. Carter's husband had access to her identification documents, her devices, and her residence network. The attempted access aligns with his control behaviors and culminated in endangerment. During a blizzard, Grace watched executives exchange looks. People trained to smell risk like blood. Grant was finished. 2 days later, in court, Grant tried to salvage dignity with a suit and a wounded expression. "Your Honor," he said, voice trembling on purpose. "My wife is emotional. She misunderstood. I never meant harm." The judge cut him off. "We have body cam footage of her condition and building footage of the locked door. We have the 911 call from her smartwatch. This is not a misunderstanding." Grace didn't speak until her turn, and when she did, she didn't describe feelings first. She described facts. "He took my phone," she said. "He locked the balcony door. He watched me freeze. His lover mocked me. and while I was outside, someone tried to access my inheritance." Grant's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Because the final ruin wasn't emotional, it was official. The court granted the protective order. The Financial Crime Unit opened an investigation into attempted fraud and unauthorized access. Grant's employer placed him on immediate suspension pending investigation, then terminated him when compliance found internal access logs tied to Liana's work terminal. Liana tried to deny it until the digital trail cornered her. Login timestamps, email pings, and a recorded call where she admitted she just wanted a cut. When cameras caught Liana leaving the building in tears, the same social circles that once welcomed her went silent. Grace stood outside the courthouse, winter air biting but no longer terrifying. Hargrove handed her a phone with a final scheduled message from her mother, released only after Grace's identity confirmation. Grace read it, lips trembling. "If you're reading this, you survived the first storm. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. Now listen, more storms will come wearing smiles. Trust evidence, trust your instincts, and trust that you were never as powerless as they needed you to believe." Grace exhaled, grief and strength mixing until she couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. Grant had locked his poor wife on the balcony during a blizzard to break her. But what Grace did next, calling for help, preserving evidence, activating her mother's hidden safeguards, and turning truth into a weapon, didn't just hurt him, it ruined him. And as Grace walked to the waiting car, she realized something chilling. The $50 billion wasn't the biggest inheritance. The biggest inheritance was her mother's foresight, because someone had built this outcome long before Grant ever thought to lock a door.